So, for the third time now, the courts have had to defer the execution of the Nirbhaya convicts, and a lot of blame is starting to be thrown around at this point. Is it the fault of the convicts themselves, whose delaying and dilatory tactics have been hauled up by the courts? Is it the problem? Is the problem with their lawyers? Are they playing the wrong games? There, so AB Singh was, for instance, pulled up by the court just yesterday, and they said, you're playing fast and loose with procedure. Or is it the Delhi jail authorities who should have ideally pushed for all of this to happen long before, given the convicts' appeals to the Supreme Court were dismissed back in 2017? Or perhaps, does the problem lie elsewhere? Does the problem instead lie with the courts themselves? Now, the courts have specified 3 dates now for the execution of the convicts, and every time they have had to change it because of what the law clearly says. And every time they seem to be making the same mistake over and over and over again. And any neutral observer or who has seen these orders come out specifying the date of execution has known that the executions cannot happen. Now, why is that the case? Well, that's because there are a number of legal safeguards and remedies which are available to convicts on death row, and until they're exhausted, you cannot actually have them executed. And in the Nirbhaya convicts case, those remedies have been available, and it is known to the courts, known to the public, known to everyone at this stage, those remedies are still available, and yet the courts have been giving these entirely implausible and impossible execution dates. So let's look at the dates. Well, the first one was 22nd January. Then there was 1st Feb, and then there was 3rd March. Each of these was given by an order just 2 weeks before. Now, why is this 2 weeks thing a problem? Well, that's a problem because you can only execute a convict on death row after his mercy plea. His mercy petition to the President of India, which is the very, very last resort they have, is rejected. And 14 days after that rejection, they can be executed. That's what the law says. Shatrughan Chauhan case, Supreme Court. It's in every Delhi, every jail manual, including the Delhi jail manual, which is applicable here. Everyone knows this. So, in those circumstances, it's very clear that you cannot execute a convict till 14 days after the rejection of their mercy plea. Now, there's other sort of remedies which are available, which go to the courts before that. There's after all appeals are exhausted, you have review petitions, curative petitions. All of those in this case were also applicable earlier when some of these execution dates were specified. Despite knowledge of this, the trial courts kept specifying execution dates just 2 weeks forward, knowing that this timeline couldn't work. So when they specified the first execution date for 22nd January, that was by an order dated 7th Jan, they knew that most of the mercy pleas, and in fact most of the curative pleas were still there. When they specified the date for 1st Feb, they still knew that at least 2 of them still had mercy pleas pending, they had curative petitions still pending. And when even the last date of 3rd March was specified, the 6 a.m., 3rd March, as we were all being told, when that was specified, again, they knew that Pawan Gupta's curative petition was yet to be filed. They knew that Pawan Verma's mercy plea was yet to be filed. So therefore, they knew that this date was not possible. Because if you keep specifying dates 2 weeks in the future, knowing that that can only take place after the rejection of the final mercy plea, there is something seriously wrong with the process you are adopting. Now, as we said, the Supreme Court law on this is clear. It was also very clear that it wasn't as though, you could execute these convicts separately. There is a judgment from 1982 of the Supreme Court in the Harbans Singh case which said that you cannot do that. The Delhi High Court on 5th February reaffirmed that, said that these convicts could not be executed separately. So in those circumstances, it made no sense for the courts to be specifying each of these dates. Now the date has been sort of deferred until further orders, which is basically 14 days from whenever 14 days from whenever Pawan's mercy plea is rejected. Now, what is the problem with the court's approach? One, as we said, it's actually wrong in law, which means that you keep having to scramble to the court to go back to the courts, which makes again them also look bad. There's also the fact that this is a disservice to the convicts themselves. At the end of the day, they also have certain rights, and we are a country which follows the rule of law. You cannot keep giving them an execution date, making them then rush to the courts to get a stay because the law says that you can't execute them at that time, putting them through that ordeal at that moment of time. That's a problem. It's also a massive disservice to the family who keeps thinking that, okay, finally now it's going to happen, and you're then taking it away each time because of your own mistake. It is a mistake of the courts. They knew it was not possible, and yet they kept specifying these days. this is not as though something that the courts knew they, didn't have an option. Like when we look at the Yaqub Memon case or other cases in the past, the courts specify a date 2 months in the future, 3 months in the future, because by then all the other remedies will be exhausted. In this case, that would have meant all the curatives could have been done, all the mercy pleas could have been filed, and so you knew that by then there would be no problems. Even if the convicts adopted any sort of delaying tactics, and at the end of the day, that's hardly surprising given it's their lives on the line, it would have been fine. And lastly, of course, this is a disservice to the rule of law. It creates doubts in people's minds about the way the judiciary functions. Do they even know what they're doing? And it also creates doubts about the process. Now, these safeguards which are there in place in the law are required because you're taking a person's life. And yet, if you keep having these kind of delays crop up, it makes the whole system look bad, make it look rotten, even though, for instance, the Nirbhaya case is actually an example of timely justice. It makes it look like it's something which isn't, and that is a very, very serious problem for the rule of law and needs to be kept in mind, and this should not happen again when we have another case like this.